I am here with my friend Hannah Linder. It has been so fun catching up with her and getting to talk about writing and books. And she is a suspense author like I am, and she writes Regency romantic suspense novels, which is so fun. She has a book coming out in November called Never Forgotten, and I'm so excited to chat with her about this book and how she writes and does all of those things. So welcome, Hannah. Thanks so much for being here and for chatting. It's been so fun to connect. And I'd love to just start things off with hearing what is your method that you use for building tension when writing a story?
That's a good question. I think that something that I usually am consciously aware of as I'm writing the book is I want to build the suspense right from the beginning and let you know that the stakes are high. But I usually try to whatever's happening, like whatever tragedies are happening, like start them off as small as I can and then build as the story goes along. So like one book in the beginning, like the cat gets killed, that's terrible, like it's a horrible thing, but like it's small compared to like maybe their lives being threatened. So then like at some point like the house catches on fire, and so it does depend on like the plot of the book, but to start off as low as I can and then build to like where at the end it's like the major climax. So yeah, that would probably be my answer to that.
I love that because I feel like that's similar to what I do with the tension of trying to keep the story like going along. And so it's like you want to do what's bad to your character, and then you do what's worse, and then what's like the worst thing that could ever happen to them is like at that climax point. And so it helps keep the story moving along, which is great.
Yeah.
How do you, with that tension, how do you put readers on the edge of their seat throughout the story? Like if there is a slower scene or if
Hmm.
they're not in that race for their lives.
Hmm. So I heard something at a conference one time that really stuck with me. And they said to put the character in a situation that you don't even know how to get them out of. Like it's so bad. And like they're so close to like the end of their life or the end of everything being ruined that like you as the author is like, how am I going to dig them out of this hole? And so I think like just literally like laying it on your character, destroying them as much as possible, as horrible as that sounds, is like the best way to make readers like actually cringe, because like you're waiting till the last second and they're like, oh, are they gonna die? So
I love that. I love how you said like it sounds horrible that we're putting them through like so many different hoops, but it is like we have to do what's the worst thing for our characters in order to keep people on the edge of their seat. I feel like I always try to add in that like one or two twists at the end of the story where like I didn't even see that coming. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like this took a turn that I wasn't prepared for. And so, like you said, how am I going to get these characters out of this? And I also feel like when I'm writing each chapter, I'll leave each of those chapters like on a cliffhanger at the end. And then it's like, okay, like I just need to know what happens next.
right.
So as much as the reader is like, okay, I got to stay up late and keep reading, I'm like, I got to keep writing. Like I need to find out what happens.
Right.
The character.
Yeah, that's a really good tip, is ending the chapter on like a cliffhanger. I love that.
Yeah, so how do you work throughout your story to keep the killer or the mystery thread suspenseful until the very end when you reveal everything?
Mm. Um, Sometimes I think about it too much, because with some books I'm like, okay, it needs to be the least obvious person. But then I'm like, would they suspect the least obvious person? So it needs to be the person they would suspect because they think it's gonna be them and then it's not. So I don't know. Like sometimes I switch it up and try to make it like the least, and sometimes I switch it up and try to make it the person who you actually would suspect, but it's so obvious you really don't think it's them. Or sometimes, like we were talking earlier, depending on the plot, like sometimes I, as the author, don't know which person is going to be the killer till way into the book. So that's always fun, because it's like, okay, I literally don't know who it's going to be. It could be anybody. And so it just would make it really hard for the reader to guess, like, who is actually the guilty one or the murderer.
Yeah, which honestly amazes me as we were talking earlier, and you had said that about not knowing like who the killer is until you're writing the story. I was like, I can't fathom that because I'm like, okay, I need to know exactly who it is from the beginning. But then I also get nervous. I'm like, are readers going to like pick up on this like right away? Like, how can I throw the breadcrumb trail enough that the clues are there without them figuring out like three-quarters of the way through the story?
Right.
But I feel like there was even one time I wrote a book and at the end of it I thought I knew who had done it and then it ended up they were just an accomplice to the actual killer, and so that threw me for a loop, and so I was like, okay, this is adding a good twist that I didn't see. Hopefully readers are left to wonder as well.
Right.
So with each of your characters, even from like the villain perspective to your hero and heroine, how do you keep the emotions going, and what is that like to immerse readers into that story and help them feel everything that's happening?
hmm I think a lot of it is depending on like the scene, like especially like in very stressful, like very intense scenes. I like portray their emotions by the pace of the wording, like the pace of the sentences. So like if they're really like worked up and nervous and going through this like intense scene, like I noticed that in my mind I'm reading it really quickly, and so like the sentences are really short and choppy. And I feel like the way you word things as an author is kind of like throwing off what kind of emotion that they're feeling. So like in the calmer scenes, you know, you're really like fleshing out their thought process, and it's like you have room to be a little more like elegant in your wording. And then when you get to those really intense scenes, then you're just like everything is like life or death, and it's I don't know. So I feel like you can do a lot with just the way that you word your scenes as far as like pulling in the emotion.
I love that. I love what you said about like the pacing because each scene is going to be different, whether they're in that like fight for their life suspense, like they hit the ground running, versus okay, they have some time to breathe and to relax and to think
Right.
about and process what just happened and how are they going to respond to that. I feel like when I'm writing with my characters, I will sometimes like start acting out like what is actually happening in the scene. So like sitting at my computer and I'll like lift my hands, be like, okay, if they're pointing the gun this way, what would this look like? Or if they're sitting in the car, and then helping that process how they might emotionally like respond to something, or even what they're smelling, or what they're feeling, to really evoke that for the reader as well. So I know that we had talked earlier about how much you love just like drafting the story and creating these characters and writing the book. So what is your favorite part about writing, but then what is also your least favorite?
So I have a lot of favorites, and I have one big least favorite. I really like. I always say that my actual favorite thing about the whole writing process is actually the writing, because I really just enjoy like when I'm sitting down and getting the story out. That's like the highest level of enjoyment for me. But you know, there's other aspects like getting your first author copies or seeing it on a bookshelf that is just like so exciting. So I love all of that. Those are definitely highs. And then for my least favorite would definitely be editing. It's always like, oh, I gotta do this, but it's part of it, so it is what it is. What about
Yeah.
you?
Editing is very much can be a chore, and it's like I just wrote this story and now I have to make it better, which is great, but now I have to tweak it and do things to my characters that I wasn't expecting to have to fix. I love
Right.
what you mentioned about seeing like the author copies because that is so special. It's like, okay, I wrote this book and now it's actually here. It's like I can read it and I can hold it and it's actually happening. But yeah, so I love getting to write. I think one of my favorite parts is just the brainstorming and coming up with the ideas for the story and thinking about like who are these characters, what are they like, and almost like inviting myself into a world that I haven't been a part of yet, and just getting to explore those possibilities before I sit down to write it. And yeah, I enjoy like all of that, and then the editing part can be a little more of the bear. Okay, I put all of this work into it, and now we have a few more steps to do.
So we were
So
talking a little bit earlier before the interview, but can you share a little bit about your brainstorming process? Like, do you have some buddies that you always do it with, or do you do it solo most of the time?
yeah, so I feel like that switches. So I'm very much of a plotter, and so I like having all of my chapters like planned out. And so sometimes I'll sit down and just do that on my own, and then there are other times where I need other people's input, and so I will run to my writer friends on the phone and be like, "I need some help. I need some inspiration. Here's what I'm thinking. Tell me if this is great or not." And they're normally like, "This is great, and here's how you can make it even better." Which is great. And so, yeah, I love just brainstorming with other people and then sitting down to write it then when I have
Right.
it out.
Oh, that's fun. That's great.
Yeah, do you enjoy writing with or brainstorming with other people?
Well, normally I come up with a basic idea, and then once I have like the very generalized idea, I go to my mom, and we always have like an hour-long brain session. And she kind of like helps me to flesh out the details of the story. And lots of times I'll have like this really cool idea, but I'm like, there's this problem, and I don't know how to fix this. So how could we do this without messing up this? And so two minds is always better than one as far as like finding solutions for things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it very much feels like a puzzle that has to like you
Yeah.
have to put the pieces just perfectly in order for it to work. And so it is helpful for someone else to have that new perspective that you maybe aren't seeing. So that's wonderful that you get to do that with your mom. So you have a book coming out soon in November, which is so exciting. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this upcoming release? I think you said the book title is Never Forgotten.
Yes. So it is another Regency romantic suspense, and it's a little bit of a hard book to summarize, but basically it's about this man and this woman, Simon and Georgina, who were promised in marriage from their birth. And Simon was he grew up rich and very privileged, and he very much was just not satisfied with the shallowness of British society and just like the balls and how like superficial it all felt. And so when he became of age to start courting Georgina, he saw her through that lens and kind of just grouped her with all the people that he viewed as shallow. And so he did not want to marry her. He did not want to stay and be all the things his dad wanted him to be. So he ended up at 17 just taking off and disappearing. And he stayed gone for 12 years. And that's actually when the story begins, is 12 years later. And Georgina has never married. She's never fallen in love with anybody. And you kind of realize in the beginning of the story, like, that she never really forgot him. Like, that she, even though he didn't really pay attention to her, like, she was falling for him during that short courtship. So, he comes back at 12 years later, and his wife has been murdered, and he's got two young children. And he had been in America for those 12 years. And he's looking for the people responsible for his wife's murder. So they kind of get thrown into searching for the guilty people together. And during all that, like, he's seeing a side of her that he never saw before and never really took the time to see before. So, yeah, that's basically like the premise of the story.
I love that. I was like swooning as you're talking about Georgina and how like she hasn't forgotten about him. And I was like, oh, this is so romantic. And then you're like, yeah, and his wife was murdered. I'm like, oh, and that's where the suspense is at.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh my goodness, that sounds like such an amazing story. I'm super excited to read it. And what was the inspiration like behind this? I know that you've written Regency. So what was the inspiration specifically for this plot?
So for this book, most of my Regency male characters, because you get into like the richer British society, they're more like smooth talking, and they have their perfect tailcoats and their neckcloths, and they're very like formal, which is very attractive. But also on the other end, I was like, I really want to write a character who's just like very rugged and has like calluses on his hands and sunburns and scars and like a mountain man type dude. And so I couldn't really like think of a way to do that without sending him off to America for 12 years. So I'm like, what if I do this? And then he comes back and then he's all like macho man.
You ship him off.
So that was kind of like what started the whole story in motion for me. It was just like trying to get the mountain man in there.
I love that. That's awesome. Oh, yeah. So where can readers keep up with you to find out more about Never Forgotten and what's coming next?
So I have a newsletter and then I'm also on Instagram and Facebook.
Awesome. Wonderful. You guys should go check out Hannah Linder's new novel, Never Forgotten. And you can pre-order that on Amazon. You can check her out on Facebook and Instagram, like she said. What's your handle on Facebook and Instagram?
It's Hannah Linder Books.
Okay, Hannah Linder Books is where you can find her, guys. And I also have a romantic suspense novel coming out in March called Rescued Duty. I'm super excited about this story. This is about Zach and Naya, and Naya is an investigative reporter, and Zach is doing hazmat training and is on the rescue department in Last Chance County. And there is water contamination in town. And they are tasked together to figure out what is going on and who has been contaminating the water in town. And Zach is also trying to figure out what happened in regards to his parents' death 20 years ago. And so they realize that their paths are going to cross in ways that were unexpected. And so there is a duty to find this truth. But there is also a rescue waiting to happen. And so I can't wait for you to read more about this book as well.
I love that there's a double mystery in there.
Yeah, it was so fun to like interweave both of those and see like how they're both searching for truth in something, and then it comes together and they realize they need to work together to figure it out.
Oh, that's exciting. I always love books that have a strong backstory. So where you're like into the moment, but you're also like curious about the past. So that's cool.
Yes, yeah. And I love it too because I was able to weave in a foster care thread in this story. And so they both have this strong backstory with growing up in foster care together and just having that experience as well. And so I feel like you do see like the bird's eye view of a lot, but then you're also in the moment with the characters as well, which is really fun. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Hannah. This has been great to chat, and we will talk to you next time.